Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Orr. I'm a Eurasia analyst at RAIN. I'm here with Ekta Raghuvanshi, who's our South Asia analyst, and we are here to talk about kind of the current trajectory and really future prospects of Russia-India relations in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its fallout, its implications. There's a couple, triggers we could use for this conversation. I think the clearest one is there was a recent Quad meeting, and what's kind of
Mhm.
peculiar about that group is that there's only one country in that group that has not joined sanctions on Russia. That is India. There's a couple other things we could use. Most interestingly, there's actually an ongoing visit by the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes is in India on a visit. The kind of goals and possible results of that visit aren't exactly clear, but the bottom line is that what's going on has big implications for Russia and India, and so we can start our conversation with that. So, I mean, Ekta, I think as we start our conversation, can you tell us about why India, despite we know
Yeah.
about its history, its non-aligned stuff, but why
Mhm.
has India kind of had its special policy towards Russia in light of the invasion?
The popularly known answer, or the very main strategic concern for India is its security. Russia remains India's biggest defense partner. More than 80% of Indian systems currently that are employed in place are from Russia. Uh, and India has a very real physical threat currently from China, as well as the ongoing threat from Pakistan. So security concerns in India are the biggest is the biggest reason why I would say at this point in time that India decided to stay neutral in the conflict. Second, of course, I think it is everybody knows the non-aligned stuff, but that is important for India as a nation. It is this democracy in the global south. It has had that position even in the past when it wasn't a very big player in the international politics. Now it has that moment again. We also, India is very cautious about not taking sides. It is conscious about not getting pressurized by these global powers, trying to and maybe in the future subverts its own interests. It wants to have a very independent foreign policy, and it thinks that it is in that position because of its economy, its size, its importance in the world politics at this given juncture. So I think yes, I mean India's neutral stance. Of course, the West would have wanted India to be more vocal against the Russian actions. But no, I think the West over the past 2 months, even the West, the US have come to the realization that they can't expect a very strong reaction from India. All
Mhm.
they can do is maybe the like the visit you mentioned, they could maybe persuade India to not accelerate oil imports from Russia and in fact take advantage of the situation for their own national economy.
Yeah, and I think that the economic element is really important here because,
Yeah.
right, if there are these clear reasons why politically, India might not want to, condemn Russia or distance itself
Mhm.
from Russia,
But
one
this
thing it
is
can do is,
one more thing that I would
yeah,
like to
yeah,
point out is that uh, given those two other considerations, India is also very much interested in not letting the China Russia relationship to grow very close, because it already has China Pakistan around itself, which threatens its own security. It would absolutely do not want to alienate a very old strategic ally that is Russia, and maybe push Russia and China closer like that. So that's a very important strategic concern for India also, which always is there in the background. It
yeah.
always stays there.
That's that last point I think is particularly
Yeah.
fascinating, and we can discuss this. But my view on that is, I think that's a very understandable concern. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that I think that probably unfortunately for India now,
Yeah.
Russian Chinese relations are on they need each other
Yeah.
so critically. Particularly Russia needs China so bad that that's going to happen anyway for
Yeah.
other reasons, and so India has to kind of consider whether that's how important that is,
Mhm.
because Russia needs China for all kinds of technology, gray imports for all kinds of equipment, and things like chips. And so there's that Russian Chinese relationship, in my opinion, is
Yeah,
really going to deepen.
yeah,
Um, but I mean, I wanted to also quickly mention some of these economic
yeah.
drivers, because I think that that's a really interesting topic. I know that India has been really significantly stepping up its oil
Oh,
purchases from Russia in the wake of the invasion. And also, there's been these renewed discussions, mostly from the Russian side, regarding the ruble payment mechanism. But I think that the bottom line on those two topics is that India can still do a lot to help Russia economically, right? Not having to
mhm,
make loud political statements by political leaders. And so I think this visit by this U.S. official is probably focused on that latter part of trying to talk to Indian officials about maybe not making such big investments in Russia's economy and deepening that economic relationship. But I mean, so how do you understand these oil purchases? It seems like India is becoming a very important purchaser of Russian oil.
yeah. Just I don't know. I read something about India has already ordered like 14 million barrels of Russian oil in the first 2 months of the war, which was, I'm quoting this, which was double the figure of 2021 alone, which is a very big purchase. Although India is still more than 80% of the oil purchases are still from the Middle East. So there, in the larger bucket of Indian oil imports, Russia still has a very small proportion, but that portion has definitely increased just in these 2 months, and that the West is concerned about. Only because I think oil is not sanctioned as of now. Russian oil imports are not sanctioned. India is I think it's taking advantage. There's no other way of looking at it. It is taking advantage of the situation because oil is very expensive in the international market. It's going more than 100 a barrel, $100 a barrel, and they're getting like I've heard reports about they're getting $30 discount or something. That's a very huge price. So given the inflation in the world, in India itself, the slowing down because of the war, there's everything that I think India would do because it is in that position to use its
Mhm.
independent policy, to use its place currently with the US, with respect to the US, with its strategic alliance there, as well as being strategically allied to Russia. So I think I in fact was thinking if this was, I don't know, maybe a permanent buyer that India would go to, even after, I don't know, maybe 6 months or a year after this is over, or it sticks to its own Middle East oil supplies, even if it gets cheaper oil from Russia. I mean, that would be a fascinating thing to see how this oil imports and how oil trade develops between Russia and India. Yes,
Yeah.
the US is trying to persuade India. They have said it many times in statements in different forums that they would appreciate if India does not accelerate buying oil. We all know India will not accept that because it needs its own national security, its own economy is at stake. So I think it would just take advantage of whatever deals it could make with Russia, at least in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And we'll see, how long that continues. My
Yeah.
perception is that it will. Western countries are now trying to go after, or in, I should say, Russian oil purchases, or and possibly explore more ambitious measures like a tariff on Russian oil,
Hmm.
or or even a price cap on Russian oil, whether they're going to agree not to pay a certain amount. Um, but another, we're a place where we're seeing this same logic not go quite as far is, or actually rather probably the opposite.
Hmm.
Russia really wants the rupee payment mechanism to come back. I saw that Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, he was speaking to some Indian officials recently, and he was
Yeah.
very clear that he really wants this to happen. But my perception is that it hasn't happened yet since the invasion, and the reason that it's not going to happen is for the reason that you just said with regards to oil, which is that the mechanism is not necessarily in India's national interest because the ruble has been so volatile. And I guess my question about this for you is, do you think that there's any appetite in India to make really big long-term investments in Russia?
I think there's starting to be. I think there are very serious discussions.
Mhm.
We talked about how companies like Shell want to sell their stake, and the main contenders for buying those stake in Russia are the Indian companies, and Indian state-owned companies at that. I read yesterday about Indian energy company called GAIL. I think that is state-owned too. It has interest in buying stakes in Russia. So it it is a permanent involvement in Russia. You are going in Russia thinking you would stay there, and that this you India is, I think, at this moment thinking to take advantage of this multipolar world that it thinks it's the world is going towards, and it wants to just stay independent to its policy, take advantage whenever and wherever it can, also have both of its strategic allies to its sides. That's all I see about the ruble arrangement. Yes, I thought when we were first hearing about this a month or two ago, it would happen. I thought it would happen fairly fast because India had done this before with Russia. They had a rupee ruble arrangement in place. But the realities, I think, of this time of the current situation are a little bit different than what was before. As you said, ruble is so volatile. There are other issues like in physical logistical issues between the deliveries of ships and all the other uh, things related to physical security of this imports. I think there are some factors that are still hindering it, but I also know that there are intense ongoing conversations between Russia and India about sorting this problem of oil as well as non-oil imports. Non-oil imports, however, are very small, but they are still there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and
About
that's why I think, yeah, no, go for it.
oh no, I wanted to come back to the China question.
Yeah, let's do it.
You mentioned, of course, I do agree that India does not want them to be together, China and Russia, but India just cannot prevent it. I understand that. However, it will do everything not to accelerate it also, right?
Yeah.
If it stays a major defense importer from Russia, that does have some, I wouldn't say influence, but that does restrict Russia from outrightly acting against India with China in the subcontinent, at least, as we see in multiple smaller countries in the subcontinent. There is an ongoing strategic competition both between India and China, plus a very physical ongoing standoff between India and China. I was, I don't know, pondering about this. If we are talking about this Indian role, an enhanced Indian role in Russia because it buys these stakes. It has maybe a more so permanent oil arrangement with Russia in the future. Do we see India acting as a major player between, I don't know, maybe the East and the West, maybe Russia and or the US, because it will be very uniquely and closely placed even with the US. The
Yeah.
US has great interests in Indo-Pacific. We've seen Quad really. I won't say we have tangible mechanisms as of now, very tangible, and it's not there yet. I think we don't have the Quad moment yet, but they're still doing what they can do, being so many different democracies in such
Yeah.
different parts of the world. How do you see India's role
Yeah.
between Russia and maybe the US in the
Yeah,
future?
I mean, I think what you said about kind of India having this vision of the multipolar world is
Mm.
really fascinating, and it really gets to the heart of this question because I've spent a lot of time in Russia, and in Russia they also talk about the multipolar world.
Mm.
As it's becoming clear, I think Russia's vision of the multipolar world that it imagines is actually a little bit different from the one India has imagined, because one big piece of Russia's multipolar world, as we've seen, is this attempt to annex large pieces of neighboring states. And if that's an element of the multipolar world that the BRICS nations might have thought that they were preparing, then maybe it's not one that India necessarily endorses, right? Because I'm pretty sure that, or I know that China and India have concrete, territorial
Yeah.
border disagreements, and the threat, of that is something that India does not want to endorse or normalize, or anything like that. And so I think that just even that fact on its face is going to become clear. And so that's why when I think about this, I think that India, right, it is going to be, it's not, I don't think it, as Russia and China come together, I actually think that India is going to not necessarily, it's not going to join that kind of Russia-China axis within
Mhm.
the BRICS and that conception of the multipolar world. And I think it's actually going to position itself between Russia and China in the West and kind of put forward this alternative vision of how the multipolar world should be if China, could kind of back off of its vision for that. But that's just kind of the way that I see it, and I think that puts Russia in an interesting position because they are trying to create the future terms of cooperation in the multipolar system on their terms, right? That's why that they
Mhm.
this one of their idea was that if we do this, then we what we've done is kind of becomes a part of multipolarity, and I think that's an idea that a lot of other countries are like, are going to be very put off by, and it's going to be very controversial. And so I'm fascinated. I mean, it's also a question for you. I'm just fascinated about how, India thinks about that as they continue cooperation with Russia and China. Um, we have a question about Argentina. Uh, I don't know how they're necessarily related to this at all, but yeah, I mean, I
Is
guess the way they would be related, I guess, is that Argentina is one of these middle powers, as we sometimes call them. It's,
Yeah.
I believe maybe they were China recently proposed a BRICS plus format, and they wanted to bring in a bunch of other countries, and I think maybe Argentina was one. But my general take is that Russian Indian ties are actually an example of how, again, it's just as I said, there's all kinds of disagreements within what future multipolarity looks like.
Yeah, that makes the Asian continent, the entire Asian continent, such a fascinating place to be.
Yeah,
You have three big of course, I'm still assuming that Russia remains a big power in the future, but you have
yeah,
three or even four if you think about even Europe together. You have so many different competing ideologies, the places that they come from, and you have so many different just the way they look at the world around them, and they want almost everybody wants their own rules, right? China is itself trying to make its own rule in the international order, with its BRI or with what it's doing in the neighborhood. It wants its own rules. So it will be a very very fascinating time to see what comes out of the Ukraine conflict, and how, of course, this is a very big geopolitical shift. There's no doubt about it, about how the international order would function. But it will be very interesting how to see how this smaller dynamics within the system and this smaller subcontinent or regional level uh, dynamics, they work together. I think that would be a very very fascinating thing to see.
absolutely. And a question related to this that I wanted to ask you that I know we've talked about before is, you know, in the US, for example, there used to be the idea, it's kind of going away with each year, but the idea of kind of the Washington consensus or the foreign policy consensus, right? That, the
Yeah,
Republicans and the Democrats can disagree on a lot, but on
yeah.
foreign policy, they mostly agree. What is within India, what is kind of the state of these debates about foreign policy? Is there kind of a consensus on Indian foreign policy across the political spectrum and within the ruling party, the BJP in India? Are there any notable disagreements, or not really significant ones?
Yeah, and it would be the latter one. Not really, no significant disagreements. Even within BJP, the BJP that's currently in power has a big mandate. It can take decisions fairly independently, so it is in that position. Secondly, for whatever domestic Indian political reasons, there is the Indian National Congress, which was the other opposition party, is not as strong as it was before. But even then, there is a broad level of consensus about how India is going about this crisis. The India stance, the neutral stance on the crisis, nobody, no political group has come forward and criticized this, because in India, in the domestic scene, the threat from China, physical threat from China, is the major issue. And for that, you need Russia, you need the Russian arms. That there's no two ways about it. So there is at least in foreign policy, in how India is going about this crisis, this ongoing war. There is a broad consensus within the political scene.
Mhm. That
Yeah.
makes sense. But just to play devil's advocate, I'm not knowing very much at all about Indian politics. I
Mhm.
could imagine a political force saying, "Wait, well, hold on. If Russia is moving closer and closer to China, why are we continuing to be so closely aligned with them? Shouldn't we actually work more with our Quad partners and rely more on
Oh,
countries for arms, for other things, and kind of not necessarily join the West or anything like that, but orient, as Russia shifts towards China, shouldn't we similarly slightly shift more towards the West?"
that there's already an apparent shift towards the West. Having said that, uh, the Indian and Russian relationship, the strategic relationship since what, the 70s, even before the Cold War, that is big in Indian mindset.
Mhm,
You
mhm,
you a Russian relationship is very important like that. Second, there is also an understanding that although we have a closer or growing relationship with the US is in no position currently to be an alternative to what Russia is, at least in terms of material defense imports. So we do not have you're not getting a similar relationship out of the US that you would get out, that you're getting out of Russia, right? Uh, that is a major thing in the Indian psyche, I think.
yeah,
Even though there is this apparent shift of Russia China, uh, I think the aspect that people focus on is that, oh no, but Russia is our ally. US is, it's a very new ally. We don't completely know or trust this partner as of yet. Of course, US, in terms of even defense imports, India has already tried diversifying its defense imports since, I think, the past decade. Since 2016, we've seen new players like France, Israel, even the US being in the foray of defense, from where India imports majority defense articles. But even then, nobody has matched Russia. I will again stress on this point. The US, countries like US, are not in a position to provide sensitive or highly advanced technology to India. Uh, Co-development with India has not started.
mhm,
However, Russia
yeah,
has done that. Those are very
yeah,
important
that's big.
considerations, right? You cannot let go of the fact, and it would be a slow process, maybe diversifying and reducing their dependence on the Russian defense imports. However, that is like a long term process in the entire, I don't know, in the entire foray of things. This is like we're talking, what, 5 to 10 years down the line, when
Mhm,
India can actually physically shift completely its
yeah,
dependence. Yeah.
yeah,
So those are some important things, I think. And in Indian, I do not think they have registered how close Russia and China are.
mhm,
But they think about, oh, the US or the Russia, so it's
yeah,
it's Russia is more closer.
yeah,
That it's very interesting. I mean, this is not a major thing, but when the war started and we saw the how information was going on both in Russia, in China, and in India, at least in the Indian social media space, I was very fascinated to see this. But in the Indian social media space, there was so much support for Russia,
mhm,
and many, even in India, they believe that it was a war that the West started or the West provoked, because NATO moved in closer to Russia. And you know, that I don't know, that showed me that you have an Indian psyche. At least the people in India, they think a little bit like that, and you cannot discount that thinking also altogether, right?
Yeah, that no, I think that that last point is fascinating, and yeah, I mean, I would love to read more materials kind of on that, why that is, and how that's historically developed, and I wonder how the Ukrainians in the information space. I
Yeah.
actually the Ukrainians have been working a lot on their diplomacy vis-a-vis China. And of
Hmm.
trying to get China to distance themselves from Russia, and they've had some successes, like the Ukrainian foreign minister had a big op-ed in the like, a very important Chinese newspaper, and so their opinion was getting some press,
Hmm.
and there was trying some real serious attempts to make some distance there. I don't know what the state of Ukrainian diplomacy and information initiatives are in India, but that's definitely something I'll have to look into, because I'm sure if I were the Ukrainian ambassador or Ukrainian, I would go and say, I mean, imagine what this could mean for India.
Yeah.
Imagine if, for example, there's the corridor north of Bangladesh that connects the piece of very vulnerable pieces of Indian
Hmm.
geography, not to mention the actual border disputes. Right? Imagine if Chinese troops occupied these areas and then said it was a fait accompli, and then said that they were going to put the areas under their nuclear umbrella. I mean, how would India feel about that, right? So
Which I think they have made this argument
yeah,
once or twice, which is not a wrong argument. It's just that at this point, India's interests are different.
yeah,
That's the only thing that's stopping India. Of course, they have tried to condemn Russia in not so strong words. They have
yes.
asked for a ceasefire and to respect sovereignty, but that's the most you've gotten
And
from India.
another interesting one, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Modi or somebody also condemned the Bucha massacre, and they've at least kind of mentioned the potential war crimes
Yeah.
aspect. That's another interesting one to watch, because if India in international bodies like the UN, for example, acknowledges this as war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, etc., that's going to inevitably be tough on relations with Russia. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
I would definitely check again, but India did call on for an independent investigation. That's what I remembered for Buka also. Yes, that so for India, I think it's a developing situation too. It is just going as it's figuring out as this is happening. Uh, I was maybe thinking about this. Are there any red flags for India, or what we've seen the Buka massacre, which was a big point. However, you've it has gone. I mean, people don't talk about it anymore, right? Even yeah, India continued doing deals with it, even other countries. So, are there any red flags in this conflict for nations like the middle powers, including India, who are who are wanting to remain neutral in this, and that would just change how the world looks at what Russia is doing?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I my gut and answer was just that it probably every country has that bar for itself, and so
Mm.
it's hard to say. But I think as this goes on, and just for example, today I sent our colleague Roger, a major analytical institute has gathered its lawyers and its specialists and has deemed Russia's actions in Ukraine a genocide, right? And
Mm.
so as this goes on, eventually these kinds of initiatives and even of course the legal persecution of these events in places like the International Criminal Court or the other Hague courts. Eventually, countries at international bodies are going to have to make comments or take sides on these issues. It's a fairly long term process, of course. But as that develops, that's when eventually these countries that are neutral or don't want to take a stance, might be slowly forced or
Mm.
begin to slowly kind of take opinions as all the facts, come to light and things like that. So it's a long term kind of trend to look out for, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've gone on for half an hour here. I think that we've hit all the really. I mean, there's so much to unpack in this relationship. It's a really fascinating one. As we said at the beginning, I think it's one of the most interesting relationships to
Mhm.
watch. As the implications and results of this continue to unfold. And so, in that longer, 5-year plus perspective, it's definitely one that we will certainly be watching, and that we hope our readers who will join us will also be watching with us. So yes, please follow us on all of our social media at Rain, and please subscribe to our website stratfor.com to follow all of our analysis of this and other issues. Thank you, Ekta, and thank you for all of our listeners for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yes, happy holiday weekend.